Every night, at exactly the same hour, a cow stood outside the old man's house. She didn't eat, she didn't move, she just faced his door in the darkness. The villagers laughed at first, until one night the cow screamed so loud it woke the entire village, and by morning everyone realized she had been standing there to stop a death that no one could see. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if you believe animals know things humans don't, subscribe, because this story will change the way you listen to silence. The first night the cow appeared, no one noticed her arrival. There was no sound of hooves, no lowing, no rustle of movement in the dark. She was simply there, standing a few steps away from the old man's house, facing the door, as if she had been placed deliberately in that spot. The night was cold and still, the kind of winter night where even insects seemed to have given up. The village lay quiet under a pale moon, and the old man, who had lived alone since his wife passed, was already half asleep when the unease crept in. He woke not to a noise, but to the absence of one. Years of solitude had trained him to notice silence the way others noticed sound. Something felt wrong. The air outside the house seemed heavier, as if it were holding its breath. He rose slowly from his bed, his joints stiff, and moved toward the small window that looked out onto the dirt path in front of his home. The glass was fogged from the cold, and he wiped a small circle clear with his sleeve. That was when he saw her. A large cow stood in the moonlight, her dark shape clear against the pale ground. She was not grazing, she was not moving. Her head was lifted slightly, eyes fixed on the house, as if she were watching him watch her. The old man frowned, his heart beating a little faster. Cows wandered sometimes, especially when fences broke or feed ran low, but they did not stand like this. They did not come alone in the middle of the night and stare at doors. He opened the door just enough for the cold to bite his face. The cow did not flinch. She did not step back or turn away. She simply remained where she was, calm and unmoving, her breath rising in slow clouds. The old man cleared his throat and waved a hand, a simple gesture meant to send her back toward the fields. Still, she did not move. Not a single hoof shifted. Unease settled deeper in his chest. He glanced down the empty path, half expecting to see someone standing behind her, a farmer who had lost his animal and come looking. There was no one. The houses nearby were dark. The village slept on, unaware that something strange had quietly placed itself at the edge of one man's life. The old man stepped outside, pulling his shawl tighter around his shoulders. He walked a few steps toward the cow, careful but curious. Up close, he could see that she was healthy, strong, her coat clean and thick against the cold. This was no lost or starving animal. When he reached out, stopping at a cautious distance, she finally reacted, not by retreating, but by lifting her head higher, her gaze never leaving him. There was no fear in her eyes, only alertness. "Go on," he muttered softly, more to reassure himself than to command her. He clapped his hands once, a sharp sound in the quiet night. The cow did not move. A chill crawled up his spine that had nothing to do with the winter air. After a moment, he stepped back, unsettled, and returned inside, closing the door behind him. He waited by the window, watching. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The cow remained in the same place, silent and still, as if rooted to the ground. Eventually, fatigue overcame his unease. When he looked again before dawn, the cow was gone. No tracks, no sound, no sign she had ever been there at all. By morning, the village returned to its usual rhythm, and the old man told himself the night had played tricks on his tired mind. But when darkness fell again, and the air grew cold and quiet, the cow returned to the exact same spot, standing outside his house, facing his door. And this time, the old man understood that whatever was happening had only just begun. By the third night, the cow's presence could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. She arrived with the same quiet precision, appearing just after midnight, as if summoned by the darkness itself. The old man had stayed awake this time, sitting near the window with a cup of cold tea in his hands, waiting. When he saw her shape settle into the moonlit space outside his house, his chest tightened, not in fear, but in a growing sense of something being carefully repeated. She stood in the exact same place as before, not a step closer, not a step farther. Her body was angled straight toward the door, her head lifted, her posture steady and deliberate. The ground around her showed no sign of grazing, no disturbed soil, no wandering. It was as if she had no other purpose for being there except to stand and watch. The old man stepped outside again, slower this time, testing the night with cautious footsteps. The cow's ears twitched at the sound, but she did not turn her head. He walked in a small circle around her, keeping his distance, studying her from every angle. There were no marks on her body, no rope, no brand that he could see in the dim light. She was calm, almost unnaturally so, breathing slow and even. When he stopped in front of her, she finally met his gaze, her dark eyes reflecting the moon with an unsettling clarity. By morning, the village had begun to notice. A neighbor mentioned seeing hoofprints near the old man's house before dawn. Another laughed it off, saying animals wandered all the time. But when the cow returned again the following night, and the night after that, people started whispering. Some said the animal was sick, others muttered about bad signs, about cows that appeared where they did not belong. A few children gathered at a distance one evening, daring each other to throw pebbles toward her, only to back away when she didn't react at all. What unsettled everyone most was what she didn't do. She never ate the grass near the house. She never lay down to rest. She never wandered or shifted her weight. She stood through the coldest hours of the night, facing the door, unmoving, until the sky lightened and she vanished as quietly as she had come. The old man's sleep suffered. Each night he found himself listening for her before he saw her, waking again and again to check the window, half expecting the spot outside his house to be empty. When it wasn't, a strange mix of relief and dread settled over him. Relief that the pattern had held. Dread because patterns meant purpose, and purpose meant something was being asked of him. One night he tried leaving a bucket of water near her. She ignored it completely. Another night he scattered fodder on the ground. By morning it was untouched, stiff with frost. The cow's needs, it seemed, had nothing to do with hunger or thirst. Neighbors began to argue about what should be done. A few suggested calling the owner, though no one could agree on which farm she might belong to. Others insisted she should be chased away before something worse followed. The old man listened but said little. The cow had chosen his house, and whether he liked it or not, that made him part of whatever story was unfolding. As the nights passed, the silence around her grew heavier. The air seemed to tighten whenever she appeared, as if the village itself was holding its breath. And though she had made no sound yet, the old man could not shake the feeling that she was not there to stay quiet forever. Something was building, and when it finally broke, it would not be gentle. By the end of the first week, fear had settled into the village like an uninvited guest. What had begun as curiosity had turned into unease, and unease into whispered warnings passed from one doorstep to another. People no longer laughed when the cow's name came up. They spoke in lower voices now, glancing toward the old man's house as if the animal might hear them even in daylight. The cow continued her routine without deviation. Every night just after midnight she appeared. Every morning just before sunrise she vanished. She made no sound. She left no clear trail, and she stood facing the same door as if nothing else in the village mattered. The old man felt the change most deeply. Sleep no longer came easily. When it did, it was shallow and restless, filled with half-dreams of hooves scraping the earth and eyes watching from the dark. He began to keep his lamp burning through the night, the small circle of light a thin barrier against the questions pressing in on him. Each time he rose to look out the window and saw the cow standing there, his heart would thud hard once, then settle into a slow, heavy rhythm. He tried to reason with himself. Animals did strange things. Winter confused them. Hunger drove them to unfamiliar places. But none of those explanations fit what he was seeing. The cow was not thin. She was not lost. She was not wandering. She was waiting. Neighbors offered advice, none of it comforting. One insisted the cow should be driven away before she brought illness or misfortune. Another warned that animals sensed death before humans did and came to mark it. A few suggested the old man should leave his house for a few nights and see if the cow followed. The idea lodged in his mind like a splinter. He wondered briefly if she would. One evening, just before nightfall, two men tried to chase the cow away. They approached her with sticks and loud voices, clapping their hands and stamping their feet. The cow did not move. She did not lower her head or show aggression. She simply stood there, absorbing the noise as if it were rain. When one of the men stepped too close, she turned her head slowly and looked at him. That single, steady gaze was enough. He stopped, mid-step, an uneasy silence falling over the small crowd. They backed away without another word. After that, no one tried again. The old man noticed something else during those nights, something small but troubling. Each time the cow appeared, she was angled just slightly, not directly at the door, but toward the ground beside the house. The shift was subtle, easy to miss, but once he saw it, he couldn't unsee it. Her attention wasn't fixed on him alone. It was fixed on the earth. He began to walk the area in daylight, slow circles around his house, scanning the ground for anything out of place. The soil was hard with frost, the grass pale and brittle. Everything looked as it always had. Still, the feeling followed him, a quiet certainty that something beneath his feet was wrong. That night, the air felt heavier than usual. Clouds covered the moon, and the dark pressed in close. When the cow appeared, she stood more rigid than before, her muscles tense beneath her hide. The old man watched from the doorway, his breath catching when, for the first time, she shifted her weight and let out a low, uneasy sound. It wasn't a cry. It wasn't a call. It was a warning. And as the sound faded into the night, the old man realized that the silence they had shared until now was coming to an end. The sound came again, louder this time, tearing through the night with a force that jolted the old man upright. It was not the soft lowing of a cow calling for her herd. This was raw and sharp, a sound edged with urgency and fear. It cut through the darkness and echoed against the walls of the houses nearby, waking dogs, startling birds from trees, pulling lights on one by one across the village. The cow stood in her usual place, but everything about her had changed. Her body was rigid now, her head lifted high, her breath coming fast. She let out another cry, longer, more desperate, stamping one hoof against the frozen ground. The noise carried a weight that made people step back from their doors instead of toward them. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. The old man hurried outside, the cold biting through his clothes, his heart pounding hard in his chest. He had never heard an animal cry like this before. It wasn't pain, it wasn't anger, it was alarm. He stopped a few steps away from her, unsure what to do, and for the first time since she had begun coming, the cow turned her body slightly, away from the house. She cried again, then took a step. The movement was small, deliberate. She walked a short distance, then stopped and looked back at him. Her eyes met his in the dim light, steady and intent. The message was clear enough that it sent a chill through him, far colder than the winter air. She wasn't just standing anymore, she was asking him to follow. Voices rose behind him as neighbors gathered at a distance, some holding lanterns, others whispering prayers under their breath. A few shouted for him to stay back, warning that animals behave strangely before attacking. But the cow did not charge. She did not threaten. She took another step, then another, pausing each time to look back, her cries softer now, but no less urgent. The old man hesitated only once. Then, driven by a feeling he could not name, he followed. They moved slowly across the frozen ground, the cow leading, the old man trailing a few paces behind. The village lights faded as they passed beyond the houses into a stretch of land rarely visited at night. The cow's cries stopped, replaced by an intense, watchful silence. She walked with purpose now, her path straight, unbroken, as if she had memorized it long ago. They reached the edge of an old field where weeds poked through thin snow. The cow halted abruptly and stamped the ground hard, once, then again. She lowered her head and let out a deep, trembling sound that vibrated in the old man's chest. He stepped closer and felt it then, a faint vibration under his boots, the unsettling sense of emptiness beneath solid ground. His breath caught. The earth here looked no different from anywhere else, but his instincts screamed at him to step back. He knelt cautiously and brushed snow aside with his hands. The soil beneath was cracked, sunken just slightly inward, the shape of it wrong in a way that made his stomach twist. An old pit, collapsed and hidden by time, frost, and carelessness. The cow let out one final low cry and stood perfectly still beside it. The old man stared at the ground, understanding dawning slowly, painfully. Whatever lay beneath that fragile surface had been close, too close, and every night she had stood outside his house, she hadn't been guarding him. She had been guarding this. The old man stayed kneeling at the edge of the ground long after the cow fell silent. The night felt suddenly enormous, stretched wide around the small circle of lantern light and frozen breath. He pressed his palm carefully against the earth and felt it shift, just slightly, just enough to confirm what his eyes already knew. The surface was thin, brittle, pretending to be solid while hiding a hollow beneath. One careless step in daylight, one stumble in the dark, and the ground would have given way without warning. Behind him, the village had gone quiet. The neighbors who had followed at a distance now stood frozen, lanterns held close, their earlier fear replaced by something heavier. No one spoke. No one needed to. The truth was written in the broken shape of the land, in the way the cow stood beside it, her head lowered, as if keeping watch over a grave that had not yet been claimed. The old man rose slowly and took a step back, his heart racing as he imagined how close he had come. This path was one he walked every morning. In poor light with frost underfoot, he might never have noticed the danger until it was too late. The thought made his knees weak. The cow shifted then, placing herself squarely between him and the collapsed ground, her body broad and solid, an unspoken barrier. It was a simple movement, but it carried a meaning that silenced the murmurs behind them. Someone whispered that the pit must be old, left from years ago when soil had been taken and forgotten. Another muttered that the recent cold and thaw must have weakened it further. The explanations came easily now that the danger had been named, but they did nothing to erase the fact that the cow had known before any of them did. Night after night, she had returned to the same place, refusing to leave, waiting for the moment when silence would no longer be enough. As the first hint of dawn touched the sky, the cow finally moved. She turned away from the pit and walked a few steps toward the fields, then stopped and looked back once more. Her eyes passed over the gathered villagers and settled on the old man. For a long moment, they held each other's gaze. There was no triumph in her expression, no demand for recognition, only calm certainty. Then she walked away. By the time the sun rose fully, the pit was marked, roped off, and surrounded by anxious conversation. Men talked about filling it in, about how many lives it could have taken if it had collapsed completely. The old man stood apart from them, watching the place where the cow had disappeared into the morning mist. The night's fear had drained away, leaving behind something quieter and harder to name. He returned home slowly, his steps careful now, his eyes drawn again and again to the ground beneath him. When he reached his door, he stopped and looked back toward the field. For the first time in days, the space outside his house was empty. That night, when darkness fell, the cow did not return. And the old man understood that her vigil had never been meant to last forever, only long enough to keep someone from stepping where the earth had already given up. The days that followed were quieter than the nights had been, but the quiet felt different now. It no longer carried tension or waiting. Instead, it pressed gently, like a reminder. The collapsed pit was filled and sealed under layers of earth and stone, the danger erased from sight but not from memory. Each time the old man passed the spot, he slowed his steps, his eyes tracing the outline of where the ground had once betrayed itself. He knew how easily life could vanish without warning, swallowed by something hidden and ordinary. The village returned to its routines, but something subtle had shifted. People spoke differently around the old man now, with more care, with a touch of respect that hadn't been there before. Children were warned not to wander at night. Farmers checked their fields more closely. The land, once taken for granted, was suddenly treated as something that needed to be listened to. And the cow was gone. No one saw where she went. No one claimed her. She did not return to the fields nearby or wander into another yard. It was as if her purpose had been fulfilled, and the night no longer needed her. The absence she left behind felt larger than her presence ever had. Each evening, when darkness fell, the old man found himself glancing toward the empty space outside his door, half expecting to see her silhouette standing there once more. One afternoon, while walking through the village, he overheard two men talking quietly near the well. They spoke of an old story, one nearly forgotten. Years ago, before the old man had even moved into his house, a worker had fallen into a pit not far from that same field. The ground had collapsed suddenly, swallowing him before anyone could help. The land had been hastily covered, the danger assumed to be gone. Time had hidden the wound, but it had never truly healed. The old man felt a chill as he listened. The cow's behavior began to make sense in a way that went beyond instinct. She had stood guard not just over a hole in the ground, but over a memory the village had buried too quickly. That evening, the sky burned red as the sun dipped below the horizon. The old man sat on the small step outside his house, wrapped in his shawl, listening to the distant sounds of cattle settling for the night. Somewhere far off, a cow lowed softly. The sound carried thinly on the wind. He closed his eyes and imagined her walking back into the darkness, calm and unhurried, guided by something older than fear. When night came, it passed without incident. No hoofbeats, no shape in the dark, just silence and stars. And in that silence, the old man understood the final lesson she had left behind. Not every warning comes with noise. Not every protector stays forever. Some stand watch only long enough to make sure you live to see another morning. With the danger gone, the nights returned to their ordinary stillness, but the old man found that sleep did not come as easily as it once had. The silence now felt too clean, too empty, as if something important had been removed from it. He lay awake, listening to the sounds of the village, the distant bark of a dog, the rustle of wind through dry trees, waiting for a shape that no longer appeared. Each night, he rose at least once and stood by the door, staring out into the dark space where the cow had kept her quiet vigil. In daylight, the villagers spoke less about fear and more about meaning. Some said the cow had been sent by instinct alone, that animals sensed danger long before humans ever could. Others whispered that it was something else entirely, something tied to the land and its memory. An old woman recalled how her grandmother once said cows were guardians, creatures that noticed the small shifts humans ignored. No one argued with her, not after what they had seen. The old man began to notice changes in himself. He walked more slowly now, not because his body demanded it, but because his mind did. He paid attention to the ground beneath his feet, to cracks in walls, to the way doors sounded when the wind pushed them. He listened more. The world, he realized, was always speaking. He had simply forgotten how to hear it. One afternoon, while clearing weeds near his fence, he found something half buried in the soil, a small, worn bell, rusted and dull. He held it in his palm for a long time, brushing away the dirt. It looked like the kind once tied around a cow's neck, long ago, before plastic tags and wires replaced such things. He couldn't be sure it belonged to her, but the thought stayed with him. He hung it gently on a nail near his door, where it caught the light but made no sound. The village repaired the field completely. New soil was brought in, grass was planted, children were warned never to play there unsupervised. Life moved forward, as it always did. Yet in quiet moments, people still glanced toward that place, remembering how close they had come to disaster without knowing it. On one clear night weeks later, the old man stepped outside and looked up at the stars. The air was calm, the ground firm beneath his feet. For the first time since the cow's visits began, he felt something like peace settle in his chest. Gratitude followed close behind, not loud or dramatic, but steady and deep. He did not know where the cow had gone, and perhaps he never would. But he knew this much: she had arrived when she was needed, and she had left when her work was done. And because of her, a quiet house still stood, a village still slept safely, and an old man was still alive to notice the stars overhead. Winter loosened its grip slowly, as if reluctant to admit defeat. Frost still clung to the mornings, and the nights carried a familiar bite, but the land no longer felt hostile. It felt watchful. The old man sensed it each time he stepped outside, the way the ground seemed steadier beneath his feet, the way the silence no longer pressed in on him, but rested calmly around the house. The danger that had once hidden itself beneath familiar soil was gone, and with it, the quiet dread that had followed him for so many nights. Life returned to its rhythm, though it was not the same rhythm as before. The village remembered now. People checked on one another more often. They spoke openly about things they once ignored: cracks in walls, loose soil, places that didn't feel right. The story of the cow spread beyond the village, retold with different details, different meanings, but always with the same truth at its center. Something had stood watch when no one else had thought to. The old man kept the bell by his door. Sometimes the wind brushed it lightly, just enough to make it tremble without sound. He never tried to ring it. It was enough to know it was there. A reminder, not of fear, but of awareness. Of the night when silence became a warning, and of the animal that chose to stand between a man and a hidden end. One evening, as the sky faded into soft shades of grey and blue, the old man stood outside and looked toward the field where the pit had once been. New grass had grown over it, bright and harmless, giving no sign of what had almost happened. He knew better now than to trust appearances alone. He offered a small nod toward the place, a quiet acknowledgement of what had been prevented. He never saw the cow again. But sometimes late at night, when the village slept and the air grew still, he felt the same calm presence he had felt during her silent vigil. Not outside his door, not in the dark, but within himself. A steadiness, a reminder to pay attention, to listen when something feels wrong, even if there are no words to explain it. The world did not announce its dangers, he had learned. It whispered them. And sometimes, if you were lucky, it sent a guardian who knew how to stand quietly in the dark until morning came. And because of that silent watch, an old man lived on. A village slept safely, and the earth, once ready to give way, held firm beneath their feet.